Hello, everyone. My name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar, where every other week I invite fascinating guests to talk about important topics that will help create cities that are more sustainable, equitable, playful, where everyone will be able to live healthier and happier. Today, I am connecting from Bratislava, Slovakia, where I was invited to deliver a keynote at the Start with Children Summit, and as well as to have a conversation with the city staff and also with mayors from 5 different countries. And tomorrow I'm off to Prague for a couple of days and then to Vienna. And today we have a fascinating guest, Dr. Nadina Galle, who is a PhD from MIT, has written a book that is coming out in June. And today she's going to talk about nature and technology. Are they friends or foes in our urban spaces? Nadina, thank you very, very much for accepting the invitation. We're very eager to learn from you. Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Gil, not only for inviting me here today to share a little sneak peek about the book, but also just for all of the support that you've shown myself and my work over the years. I really, really appreciate it. And as you say in the beginning, that topic of being able to create more child-friendly cities is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I believe nature plays a huge role in that as well. And I will say, just to plug the next Cities for Everyone webinar in 2 weeks with Richard Louv. I actually interviewed him quite extensively for my book, and I can only speak to that he is a brilliant mind and an excellent speaker. So I really, really recommend you check out that session as well.
Thank you. By the way, Nadina has a fabulous a podcast, and I love it. And sometimes I go running and I listen while it is. And one of the interviews, she interviewed Rich for one of those. Okay, Nadina.
I did.
Excellent technology.
I did. This is what I'm saying. Gil is very supportive of my work. Thank you, Gil. Just to quickly introduce myself, I am, well, it all started for me in high school. I really, really, really wanted to become a journalist. Sadly, I was waitlisted for journalism school. I never actually ended up getting in. So I needed a plan B. So I decided to study my second big passion next to writing, which was nature, the outdoors. And I started an ecology degree. And I didn't know it at the time when I was 18, but it led to a decade-long academic career and ultimately accumulating in me becoming an ecological engineer and getting my PhD in that. But it's wonderful to be here with you today. And at this stage in my career, now 15 years on, where I feel like much of it is coming full circle. Now proud to call myself an almost published author. And in addition to writing and being a regular columnist about these themes of nature and cities and technology, I speak frequently. I have a podcast, as Gil kindly mentioned, Internet of Nature podcast, which launched its 5th season last year. But I'm also a researcher, and I'm still very much involved in academic research. And most recently, I've gotten the opportunity to also take part in documentary filmmaking, which is a whole other new medium, which I'm exploring, script writing, screenwriting, and these things. Everything that I do is really centered around this one central philosophy. And that is that nature is not a luxury. Rather, it is an indispensable necessity of urban life. And really, all of these different things that I do, whether that's writing or speaking, podcasting, researching, creating screenplays for documentaries, is really about serving that goal. It's really about spreading the message that we need nature desperately in cities, both for climate and for the health and well-being of our urban residents. Because let's be honest, the vast majority of us live in cities, and that is a trend that is expected to increase. And it's not just that people are moving to cities for a part of their life. As Gil mentioned in the beginning, people are born in cities, raised in cities, and continue to live their lives in cities. And what's important to realize here is when I use the word cities, I don't necessarily just mean the dense urban cores that many of us think of. I'm talking about our villages, our towns, our suburban areas. We all live in some, or the vast majority of us more and more live in some kind of urbanized setting where that link to nature will become increasingly important. Unfortunately, though, many urbanites in this day and age are often disconnected from nature. And I think that's something that we can all recognize. The more urbanized and modern our world becomes, the more disconnected we are from the very essence of what makes us human. In addition to that, what I've seen coming across my work is that authorities often lack the tools to prioritize nature in cities. So not only are we dealing with a population that's disconnected from nature, we're also dealing with a population of city planners, city officials, municipalities that are really lacking the tools to be able to prioritize how important it is in cities. And I think a lot of that comes from this idea that it's when we hear about nature and technology in the same sentence, or even nature and the modern world in the same sentence, a lot of us kind of get goosebumps and we start to feel a little bit like those things don't belong in the same sentence. And that is something that I've run up against in my career time and time again, trying to help people understand that nature and technology are not this enemies of one another, foes of one another. And I think this just does a great job at explaining it. But rather offer us a way to actually help these two worlds come together. And as we've seen around the world, as we see this trend of smart cities taking off, right? This idea that technology can help us solve a lot of problems in our cities, whether that be waste management or mobility or lighting or civic processes. But nature has been left behind from that discussion, when in fact, nature is the very basis of our urban existence. So rather than put technology to the side and put the modern innovations aside, let us try and examine what might be some responsible ethical ways that we can actually use technology to enhance nature in our cities. That is where the concept Internet of Nature came from, a concept that I founded about 5 years ago now. This idea that there might actually be room for this sub-classification of emerging technologies in the smart city movement that are specifically designed to help us better map, monitor, manage, and even reconnect citizens to urban nature. And for a lot of that people, it immediately feels like, yikes, how are we possibly going to do this? Technology and nature don't belong in the same sentence. But I want to show you that there might actually be room to do that. And I'm not just going to show you, I'm going to tell you through the stories that I've heard of the many different innovators at the very heart of the urban nature. I've gotten the opportunity to interview many of them for my podcast. There's about 53 episodes out there now, and many more of them for my upcoming book. And that upcoming book is called The Nature of Our Cities, and it'll come out on June 18th. It'll be published by HarperCollins, which in and of itself feels like a huge feat to me to have a non-academic publisher, a big commercial publisher like HarperCollins, feel that the time is right for a book about nature in our cities, about urban ecology, about urban innovation, being interesting enough for a general public. This really, like, I could die happy today knowing that that work is going to be out there and being accessible to a general audience. Because as Gil mentioned before, too often we're having these conversations in silos. They stay within the ivory towers of academia. And we lack, I really feel, in the urban ecology field, the wherewithal, perhaps even the skill set, or even really feel the urgency and demand to translate these stories out of that. And I know that's a lot of what Gil's work is as well, and I really look up to him for that, being able to take these stories of urban innovation and translate that into the mainstream. And whether that's through a book or speaking or a podcast or a documentary, the medium doesn't really matter as long as it's effective. And I really do believe a book is still one of the most effective means that we have, because it ignites a conversation. Now, the book is split up into 9 different chapters, includes a prologue and an epilogue, and the chapters each cover their own separate urban issue, if you will. So we start with this idea that we've really lost touch with urban nature, and how might we be able to reconnect with that? Moves into resource management, extreme heat, wildfires, flooding, and extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, mental health, longevity, and finishes with, as I mentioned, something really close to my heart as I became a mother this past year, is connecting children to nature in our cities. This is something that I believe is really and that's why the chapter is rightfully called Raising Future Naturalists. It really sketches the future, the next generation of who are going to be our environmental stewards within these never before seen urban environments. Now, what I want to spend the rest of the time that I have with you doing is introducing you to some of the characters that you are going to see and that you are going to meet within the pages of The Nature of Our Cities. Just a little bit of a sneak peek, and then I hope we're going to have plenty of time for discussion and Q&A after the fact. Now, the first character that I want to introduce you from comes from chapter 6, The Scientists Within Us, the Biodiversity Loss chapter. And his name is Vincent Kalkman. And Vincent is an entomologist, meaning that he's specialized in insects. In fact, Vincent calls himself one of those little boys that never quite grew out of his bug phase. But Vincent was, despite working with and for insects all of his career, he was deeply traumatized in 2019 when a brand new study came out that really showed that total global insect population had declined by 41% over the past decade. Now, I know many of us have stories where they can think back to their childhood, where they'd be, driving through a forest or through a countryside. They'd be, going to a country house or a camping trip perhaps, and they remember that in the summertime months, their windshield, or their parents' windshield, I should say, if they were a kid in the back seat, was covered in insects. And that, anecdotally speaking, many people have spoken to this idea that there are less and less insects dead on windshields every single year. And this had been seen anecdotally, but it wasn't until this 2019 study that really showed that the global insect populations had indeed severely declined over the past decades. Now, this really worried Vincent Kalkman, of course, and what he wanted to do is when he discovered this study, he immediately thought to his colleague, Laurens Vos. He was working at the Naturalis, the Biodiversity Museum, Natural History Museum of the Netherlands in Leiden. And he had seen his colleague do incredible things with the identification of species that they had in their collections in the museum using artificial intelligence, being able to use something called computer vision, basically where you teach a computer to see as a human would and identify what they see on a screen. And he decided to use that new rise of artificial intelligence technology in a new way to be able to better monitor insect populations, because he rightfully believed that if we don't properly measure, then we have no idea what we have. And if we have no idea what we have, it's going to be really difficult to craft conservation strategies around these declining insect populations. So he came up with something called the Diopsis camera. Now, he worked on this with a whole team and a bunch of different stakeholders. Vincent was just one of the team members. But together, this team, they came up with this almost robot-looking thing. There's now hundreds of them spread out over the Netherlands and the rest of Europe, and they're increasing the amount every single year. And essentially, as robot-like that it looks like, it's actually quite simple in its design. This yellow screen is designed to attract mainly flying insects. They land on the screen. As soon as it lands, it takes a photo. It takes a photo every 10 seconds. It takes a photo, and then based on the size, the shape, and the estimated biomass of that insect, it's actually able to identify what that insect was, how large it was, and it's able to input that data, of course it knows the location, into what is rapidly becoming one of the largest insect biodiversity monitoring collections in the world. Now, you might wonder, what do a couple of these camera networks, what are they actually going to do about biodiversity loss in general? Well, it's interesting. Many cities are actually interested to see if they can use these cameras to see if the money they are pouring into biodiversity management campaigns are actually working. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's the only way we have at the moment to be able to objectively measure insect populations in a way that is cost-effective, replicable everywhere, and hopefully going to offer us some great results. But as Vincent always reminded me, and as he shares with me in the interview of this book, of course it's biased, right? We're looking at insects that might come up, for example, that are only flying or that might only be attracted to yellow. So it's not perfect by any means, but it's a way to at least have a baseline analysis of something that is rapidly declining, and we simply cannot fully understand it until we do a better job monitoring it. The second character stems from the wildfire chapter, and his name is Anukul Lakina. Anukul Lakina is the man that you see right in the middle of these 5 here. And what you see here is the team, or part of the team, behind the company called BurnBot, based out of the Bay Area in San Francisco. Now, as many of you have seen in news headlines across across the past decade, and especially across the last 5-6 years, have been the rapid influx of wildfires, something completely different than biodiversity loss. I hope it gives you an idea of just the scale of urban issues that are dealt with in this book. Now, Aniko Lakaina was deeply fascinated by the wildfire issue, which has ravaged his home state of California. And one of the ways that he's seen a ton of potential in being able to control and offer part of the solution to the massive wildfire problem is something called prescribed burning. Now, prescribed burning is kind of what it sounds like. It's basically doing a controlled burn of an area so that but when a wildfire comes to that area, it is essentially stopped in its tracks because the brush there is burnt, and it stops in its tracks, and the wildfire can no longer burn that area. So it's a way to preventatively burn the brush out of an area so that it is not a tinderbox if and when a catastrophic wildfire comes through. Prescribed burning actually has its roots in indigenous wisdom. Fire always was part of the landscape, but through logging practices, conservation practices, and the decrease of the sawmill operations in California and across the Western world, we've really missed a lot of opportunity to have fire be part of the landscape. This is a way to do that. But as you can see here in this photo, this is incredibly tough work, and it also creates a ton of smoke. Now, if you are a wildfire victim, or you know a wildfire survivor, you will know that the smell of smoke is insanely triggering. As you can imagine, if you have been in the path of a wildfire, if you have seen loved ones perish at its worst case, or your house be burnt down, or assets of your friends and your family be damaged, just the smell of wildfire or fire alone is enough to set off a panic attack. So Anakul really wanted to better understand how could they do prescribed burning at scale without the massive issues that it poses, not just the fact with the smoke, but also the amount of man hours and resources it takes. So together with his team, he came up with an artificial intelligence powered firefighting robot, and it's called the BurnBot. And essentially what it does, without getting into the technical specifications, it completes prescribed burns while producing very, very, very little smoke. About 5% of what is typically expected from a prescribed burn. You can even see it here in this picture versus this picture, what a difference it makes. They are able to do what they call these burn lines, which then stop the wildfire in its tracks in a way that is so effective and produces so little smoke and so cost effective that it provides the opportunity to be doing prescribed burning at scale. Because currently the USDA Forest Service is really struggling to do these prescribed burns at scale. And we know from the areas where we've done them is that they are life-saving operations. In fact, Anukul was so confident that this technology would work that he actually tested it with his team in his backyard in a super dense San Jose neighborhood just outside of San Francisco. And not a single neighbor even noticed it at work. I believe is the perfect test case to show how effective this can be. The other character I want to introduce you to is named Allison Young, who is right at the foreground of this picture. And here she is with her team from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles and the California Academy of Sciences. And together with her colleagues, she founded 9 years ago the City Nature Challenge. And the City Nature Challenge always takes place at the end of April, beginning of May. It's a 4-day long BioBlitz where citizens are asked to observe, photograph, and try to identify the biodiversity that they see all around them in their cities. Now, it started as a friendly rivalry between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and it has quickly grown into a massive, massive worldwide endeavor. In fact, 3 weeks ago, I got the opportunity to be in La Paz, not the capital, but the largest city in Bolivia, who actually won the City Nature Challenge for the past 3 years. I got the chance to be here as my role as a National Geographic Explorer for 2024. I got the opportunity to produce a short documentary about this project. And the reason why it's so fascinating is because on the one hand, it offers this 4-day celebration of urban nature. But also here, technology plays a role, not just in using your smartphone to be able to identify, hopefully something that's accessible to lots of people, but also, again, the role of artificial intelligence. As you can see here in this screenshot, this person has taken a photo of this bird, and based on iNaturalist, which is the app that is used in this challenge, it's able to offer some suggestions of what it thinks that the species might be. Now, it's not always accurate. It's about 85–90% accurate, depending, of course, on the quality of the photo. So it's not perfect by any means, as you'll see me say with many of these examples, but it offers a way to create these massive biodiversity records in cities that didn't have biodiversity records. Much like cities like La Paz, Bolivia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, and nobody knows about it. This is a fantastic way to raise awareness about the biodiversity that is in even these urbanized settings, be able to do things to celebrate that biodiversity, and then be able to log and record it. The City Nature Challenge, now in its 9th year, over 700 cities have taken part all around the world. If this interests you, anyone in your audience, you can actually become a City Nature Challenge organizer in your own city if one is not already organized. It's a fantastic way to get people involved, and it's already led to these remarkable biodiversity findings. Like, for example, in La Paz, there was this Bolivian snake that hadn't been recorded in 40 years. It had only been recorded 4 times previously by scientists. It was recorded and rediscovered, if you will, in La Paz by a high schooler. It was thought to be extinct in La Paz. The same thing for this endemic blueberry bush, which hadn't been recorded since the late 1900s, or in the beginning, sorry, I should say, of 1900s, over 100 years ago. It had not been recorded, and a university student rediscovered it and got a record of it. And that record of it now means that city officials can get to work preserving that area. Again, this idea that if we don't know it's there, we as humans cannot act to prevent and preserve these areas of really interesting natural history. Second to last example I want to share with you is Puk van Dijk. Puk van Dijk is a theater director. She lived a very nomadic childhood, lived all over the place. But when it came time for her to settle and have a family of her own, she chose Amsterdam North. And Amsterdam North is a neighborhood that is rapidly changing. And I think, honestly, it's universal, at least in many different cities around the world. It was this industrial area, and it's going through this post-industrial process, dealing with a lot of housing crisis, gentrification, deforestation, pollution. And she's a theater director. She sees the world through stories. So she started actually interviewing some of her neighbors. And as she started interviewing her neighbors and uncovering some of these stories, she realized that it might be really interesting to actually tell these stories through the voices of the neighborhood's original inhabitants. It's trees. She developed an immersive audio experience called Reuzen van Noord, or Giants of North. And what she did is she translated these stories from the people into stories as if they were coming through each tree. So it was an audio experience of 6 talking trees. You press play at the start location, and for an hour and a half, you're not looking at your phone. Your phone's in your pocket, you have your headphones on, and you are walking through this neighborhood, and you are being absolutely immersed in this audio experience as these trees start talking to you. In fact, you can, this is me enjoying the audio tour, you can actually hear some of these trees before you even see them. There are 6 talking trees, and each one of them deals with a different issue that she got. So one of the trees was situated beside a highway, and he's talking about the issues of pollution and the health effects it's had on him. The other tree is talking about deforestation, what a threat he feels, and how deeply connected he feels to its people, and he only wishes that people felt as deeply connected to him as a tree. There's another tree that I write about in the book, which was my personal favorite. She talks about loneliness. It is a big oak tree, sprawling oak tree in the middle of a town square. She is completely separated, both above ground and below ground, from her tree counterparts. And she's talking about the loneliness epidemic and the parallels that this has between trees and cities and city residents. Now, you might wonder, okay, this is interesting and all, but what does a talking tree tour, what is that going to do to be able to change anything about nature in our cities? Well, I think within reason and using technology in this responsible way, where it's not distracting from the experience, but rather enhancing the experience, is helping people see life, city life, through the eyes of trees. In fact, there was one urban planner at the city of Amsterdam that was so deeply inspired by this. He's now made this audio experience mandatory listening for all of his city planners that work in his city department with him. What I love about this experience is that it is so completely replicable. every city around the world could have this immersive talking tree tour. And it doesn't just have to be trees, it could be natural elements. This idea of using this immersive audio experience, using this technology called geolocated sound, where the sound segments are triggered based on your GPS location, I think is incredibly exciting and can be replicated in so many places. I'd love to see more of these around the world. And lastly, I want to introduce you to Dirk van Riel. And Dirk van Riel is a tree inventory technician who was frustrated with how long it took to do a tree inventory. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, a tree inventory is a basic data set of the trees in a city, at least those on public land. Their size, their species, their condition, their location, their crown volume, all of these different things. As you can imagine, as in the majority of cities still to this day, a tree inventory is done every 5 to 10 years, which you can imagine that data gets quickly outdated, where they send a tree inventory technician, like Dirk previously, to each individual tree to make these measurements. Now, I did this as part of my PhD as well, and I can tell you from experience, each time someone measures a tree, you get quite different measurements because it's quite subject to human error. Dirk van Riel was really interested by an upcoming technology at the time, which is called LiDAR. And for those of you that aren't familiar, LiDAR is the technology that self-driving cars use to ensure that they don't run into anything or anyone. They have a scanner on top of the car, and there's a laser, invisible, that goes out, and it measures the distance between that scanner and the distance to whatever it meets first. And this is done at a super, super fine scale. And essentially what you get is what you see on the left-hand side, which kind of looks like a painting of a cityscape. It is in fact a LiDAR scan. It is a 3D model, a 3D digital twin, if you will, of the city's trees. And what Tree Tracker, Dirk's company, has done is it's created an algorithm that masks out everything except for the trees. So you're left with a 3D digital twin of your trees. Okay, that's cool. What is this used for? Well, it provides you with a tree inventory in days rather than years. And what it does is those limited tree inventory technicians that you do have, you can then send them out to areas that are unable to be properly scanned, weren't scanned properly, where you want to do condition analyses. I have never seen a longer to-do list than I have for a tree inventory technician. They have so much to do. If you can imagine, they're managing hundreds of thousands of trees in any one city alone. This saves a ton of resources and time and monotonous work that is done so that they can really target their time and resources efficiently to deal with problems, which really is what excites most tree inventory technicians. But one of the most interesting use cases that I've seen it being used for is using this data in a model called iTree. Now, iTree is a model developed by the USDA Forest Service that takes a bunch of different data. So census data, pollution data, weather data, location data, and data about the tree. But as you can imagine, that this iTree is only as good as the input data. Or sorry, I should say the output is only as good as the input data. And the output of iTree are tree benefits, these free ecosystem services that trees offer us. Things like, what does this tree do for air quality, carbon sequestration, stormwater runoff, the energy impacts, how many air conditioning units does this tree save by being planted right outside my house? And what are the impacts on human health? It gives you those amounts, this model iTree, it gives you those amounts in addition to the dollar value that ecosystem service provides. So iTree is critical to urban forest policy around the world. In fact, even though it was developed by USDA Forest Service, it is now being replicated so that it specifically can work in cities around the world, including in Europe and Asia and other places. But as I said, the outputs of iTree, how much air quality this tree is able to provide, how much carbon it sequesters, how much stormwater it runs off, the impacts on human health, those outputs can only be as good as the input data. And right now, in many cities around the world, that input data is not great because it's based off of outdated data that might be subject to human error. Being able to use Dirk van Riel's method here, this LiDAR-based mapping approach, being able to use that data means that we have better iTree results, better ideas of what trees offer us in cities, and a better basis for urban forest policy. In fact, these figures are at the heart of urban forest policy and strategy all around the world. Each city wants to be able to answer the question, if I plant 100 trees in this area, what impact, what ecosystem services is that going to provide to my urban residents? Those are difficult questions to answer, but this iTree data can help. So it not only provides better figures for something that is already really at the heart of urban forestry policy in cities around the world, but what if it could actually change the definition of success in urban forestry? Right now, we measure urban forestry success in cities around the world based on the number of trees that were cut down and the number of trees that were planted every single year. Now, if you can imagine on paper, if you cut down 100 trees and you plant 100 saplings, on paper, that looks to be even. In fact, if you cut down 100 trees and plant 200 saplings, it might actually look like you had a growth in your urban forest. But that couldn't be further from the truth. When you cut down trees, they tend to be older, mature trees. And when you plant trees, they tend to be younger, smaller trees. We know now from USDA forest research that a larger tree, a large mature tree, has 8 times more benefits than a smaller statured tree. These benefits outweigh 8 to 1. What if instead of measuring urban forestry success based on the stems removed and stems planted, we were able to base urban forestry success off the amount of crown volume that grew every single year? Because that would tell us so much more about all of these benefits that we can expect from trees. And that might incentivize urban forestry differently. We might be able to stay away from, politician dribbled, big shovel, photo in the ground tree planting campaigns to campaigns that, yes, plant new trees, but also take better care at preserving the old trees that we have, because we recognize them for the incredible assets and green infrastructure that they provide to our citizens. And this is what really gets me excited about this technology, is that we can actually revolutionize how we measure the success of nature in our cities. Now, I hope throughout all of these examples, and that was 5 quick ones, characters, technologies, people that are really at the heart of all of these stories, I hope that I've shown you that this book and my work are not about this techno-optimistic future where technology is going to solve all our problems. Absolutely not. All of these examples I hope that I've shown you are about putting nature first, about providing nature its rightful place in our cities so that we can take better advantage of all of the benefits that nature provides us, both from a climate, economic, and social perspective. And that technology is simply a tool, one of many that we have in our toolbox, that I believe we would be foolish not to adopt in this journey towards more nature in our cities, because we need more nature desperately in our cities, and we need all hands on deck and all the tools at our avail to be able to reach that goal. So I hope throughout all of this, you see that my philosophy really is, yes, nature is an indispensable, not a luxury in our cities, it is indispensable necessity in our cities. And to get there, we can use technology in a responsible way to build better and more nature-rich communities for all of us. Now, one last thing I'll end on is Gil asked that if there's anything I could do as a gift to the Special Cities for Everyone community, because I know there's so many of you, and I think this topic resonates deeply with you. So for anyone that pre-orders a copy of The Nature of Our Cities before June 18th, and you can do so at any retailer, all of the information is at my website, nadinagalle.com, that if you pre-order a copy before June 18th, you have the chance to join the Nature of Our Cities book club, which will get you, in addition to the book, a companion reading guide with 20 questions, book club webinar, and also a private LinkedIn group to continue the conversation. A little gift from me to you to show my appreciation for being able to share my story here with you today.
Nadina, thank you. And Nadina, we always ask the guest to end with a call to action of people. So you had a provocative question at the title of the presentation on nature and technology. So why don't you end with a call to action? And also I want to thank you for having been such an amazing guest. And please share the screen at the end with the information on the book. So what is your call to action on nature and technology and urban? Yeah, it's perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gil. I would say my call to action, other than, of course, joining the book club, is we started this conversation about trying to figure out nature and technology, friends or foes. I think by the end of the conversation, you can tell that I'm leaning towards this idea that they may very well be friends. And the reason why is I believe, as I mentioned or hinted at the end of the presentation, is that when we are trying to do almost the impossible, right? We are trying to have our cake and eat it too. We want to live in nature-rich cities, but we also don't want to give up any of the comforts that modern life and modern cities have come to provide us with. So we need to think quite innovatively, how can we both go back to nature, or as Richard Louv, who I'll quote again here, likes to call it moving forward, going towards nature. How can nature have a role in the modern, futuristic cities of the future? Something, something as deeply personal as grounding, walking barefoot on the grass, smelling of the tree, hugging a tree, being absorbing of its microbes, of its microorganisms, improving our immune systems, listening to the birds, something that is so deeply inherent to how we lived our lives as ancient humans when we spent 90% of our time outdoors. We now live in a world where we spend 90% of our time indoors. How can we create cities that invite us to spend time outdoors for our better health and for that of our climate and for that of our environmental resilience? How do we do that in the modern world? That is a really big question that I invite all of you to join me on. I don't have all of the answers, but what I can offer you is these incredible stories of people that are using modern day innovations to help bring us back to a place that I think we were happier and healthier and better for it. And that, I believe, is one of the biggest issues that are dealing with in our time. How do we give nature its rightful place in our modern living habitats?
Thank you, Nadine. I think that a pandemic was horrible, but if any good thing came out of it is that we realized the impact, the positive impact of nature in our mental health, as well as physical and environment. This has been fascinating, and I thank you very, very much for sharing this. And thanks a lot, Nadine. Have a wonderful book launch next month. We wish you the very, very best.
Thank you so much, Gil. It was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Nadina, thank you, thank you. What a great presentation. We learned so much. You explained complicated concepts in simple terms, and the images were also very, very powerful. We have technology, we have nature, humans, we are part of that nature. So how do they interact in order to help everyone, to be positive, to be constructive? I wish you all the very best with your new book, edited by HarperCollins. It's really amazing. I hope that everyone buys it, and not only one copy, but two, so that they can share it with their mayors. And this video also, please share it with decision makers, with elected officials, with city staff, media, advocates, friends, anybody who cares about people and cities. Thank you, Nadina. Thank you, everyone that attended this amazing session. And I'll see you in 2 weeks, same time, same place.